Hello, I hope you're doing well and ready for a restful, relaxing Shabbat. I wanted to share a lesson that I think is important and profound from our Torah portion this week, in which the Torah presents the twins, Yaakov and Esav, and the dynamic that takes place within the family of Isaac and Rebekah. These are their children. They waited 20 years after marriage before having these children. Isaac described as 60 years old when they're born. And here they are, and they're so different from each other. They have such different characteristics. They're described in different ways. And each is a favorite to one of the parents. Listen to what the Torah says. It says, Vayehav Yitzchak et Esav ki tzayid befiv. That Isaac loved Esav because, on the literal translation, because he had trapping or hunting in his mouth. And what most understand this is because Esav was a hunter, and he would bring his father food. He would bring meat to his father. So Isaac loved him. There are others who say, no, his mouth is Esav because Esav would entrap with his mouth. He would speak falsehoods. He would be deceptive. But either way, Isaac loves his son Esav, the firstborn, the one who emerged first. V'Rivka ohevet et Yaakov, and Rebekah loves Jacob. It's favoritism at its most extreme. And as the Kli Yakar presents, he says, listen to the difference in how the Torah describes. Isaac loves Esav because there he puts meal, he puts food in his mouth. And Rivka loves Yaakov. For Isaac loving Esav, there's a reason. For Rivka loving Yaakov, there's no reason. And as we know, batel tam, batel davar, that once the reason, once the matter is canceled, is annulled, batel ahava, that the love will be annulled as well. If love is dependent on something, on what someone does for you, on what someone does for me, if it's dependent on a gift, if it's dependent on giving one particular thing, then the love won't be. Love has to be a love of the soul. It has to be a profound love. It can't be conditional. If you do this for me, then I'll give you my love. That's not the way love works. Rivka loves Jacob simply because that's the profound love. And what the Torah does not describe is almost as meaningful as what the Torah does describe, because whereas the Torah tells me that Isaac loved Esav, what the Torah does not tell me is what Isaac felt about his other son Jacob. And whereas the Torah tells me that Rivka loved Yaakov, I don't know how Rivka felt about her other son Esav, and it's almost tragic to think about that. And it's been suggested that, yes, we, the readers, don't know, but perhaps the children themselves didn't know what the other parent felt about them. Permit me to share a beautiful story. It's not my story, but it's a story that was told by Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, one of the great teachers and leaders in Israel and Efrat, who's been a guest at Shara Shamayim. And I always find his teachings meaningful and impactful. And he spoke about a family friend who was a survivor of the Holocaust. And he said she was a beautiful and intelligent woman who was blessed with this strong character. And she had a rare ability to express herself. And during one of the many conversations, she would often reminisce about her childhood. And she shared in one of the conversations with Rabbi Riskin and his family that one of the happiest recollections of her life was the day in which she was forcibly removed from her family and taken by the Nazis to an extermination camp. It's a shocking statement. And of course, as she told this, those listening to her were shocked as well. And she described a family situation, a dynamic growing up in which her sister was the one who was favored. She was the one who was more obedient. The sister was more obedient and more frum, more religious. And yet this woman telling the story, she was the rejected child. She was the rebellious one. And if there was one thing of butter and one of margarine, well, the sister would always get the butter and this woman would always get the margarine as a little girl. And what was even more difficult is that her mother would sometimes, when she was angered by this by this child. She was the younger sister. When she was angered by her, she would sometimes say, well, you're probably not my biological daughter anyway. You were born in a clinic. Your sister was born at home. So maybe they switched you in the hospital. The doctors probably switched you. And of course, it's a very difficult thing to hear and difficult relationship, and one can't judge from this distance, but it sounds traumatic. And as the Yiddish phrase goes, Rabbi Riskin teaches, the Yiddish refrain, a patch der geht, a vart besteht, that a slap departs, but a word besteht, a word remains, a word stays. It makes an impact. And then the Nazis came to the hometown, and they came to round up all the children. And only at this time, only the woman telling the story and her parents were at home. The other sister wasn't. And her father, immediately as they came into the house, the Nazis came into the house, the father sat down and tried to write a note to the Ger Rebbe, a follower of the Ger Rebbe, a petition to the Rebbe to save or to pray and to intercede on behalf of the child. And her mother threw herself at the feet of the Nazi beasts, and she begged them to spare the child. Take me instead. And this woman said that in that moment, she felt absolutely no fear. And even when they loaded her onto the cattle car, she said she could feel only joy, because she now knew that her mother truly loved her. She now knew that she was her parents' beloved daughter. She now knew that she was accepted and not rejected. She now knew that her mother would lay down her life in order to save the life of this daughter. And in thinking of how much in that story and how much in life the acceptance and the support of one's parents means to a child. Because in life, a child doesn't ask to be born, and a child is born so vulnerable, so helpless. And the only thing that can help a child, that can help an adult, that can help a person in life, that very first layer of protection, is the love and the support and the protection that their parents offer the child, and that the parents pledge to do everything possible to make sure that that child is safe, is happy, is healthy. And that's what, in our story in the Torah, perhaps, that's what Esav yearned to hear from his mother, from Rebekah. And that's what Jacob yearned to hear from his father, from Isaac. Just that knowledge that we too are loved. I know that there's a favorite thing going on with my sibling, but I need to know that I am loved as well. And it's a call, I think, to all of us to articulate that love and support. It's not only in a parental relationship, but in any relationship. Simply the ability to express to someone else that you have my admiration, you have my love, is a very powerful means of supporting that person in life and giving them protection against vulnerabilities and insecurities and anything else that might creep in. The knowledge that I mean something to someone else, that you mean something to me, is a very powerful knowledge that from the story in our Torah portion we learn, if only they had that, if only Jacob, if only Esav had that knowledge that they too were loved by the other parent, how differently their lives might have turned out and how differently human history might have turned out as well. Stay safe, stay healthy, everyone, and Shabbat Shalom. Al HaTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al hanviim ve'al yom ha'Shabbat hazeh shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu l'kedusha v'limnucha lechavod u'letifaret. Al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach umevarchim otach yitbarech shimcha befi kol chai tamid le'olam va'ed baruch atah Adonai mekadesh haShabbat.
That was the Bar Mitzvah boy at the Emmanuel Synagogue in West Hartford, Connecticut, On November 12th, 1988, also Shabbat Toldot. Yes, that was me. I actually had 3 bar mitzvahs, not just one. That morning, I observed it in my hometown in front of my friends, my family, and all my North American loved ones. A month later, I traveled to the Caribbean and did the same thing all over again with a new parasha and a new haftarah, but this time for my family from Curacao. And a month after that, I traveled to The Hague, and I did the same thing with a new parasha and a new haftarah for all of my Dutch family in the synagogue that bears the name of my great-grandfather, Beit Yehuda. I always tell my bar mitzvah students that this path of Jewish adulthood that they are setting out on includes learning skills that are not just usable for one day only in their lives. They are skills that will take them wherever they find themselves around the globe. As long as there's a Jewish community, they can find a home there because they've learned these brachot, because they've learned to chant the Torah and a haftarah. I actually learned this for myself my first week of university at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Growing up a rabbi's kid, it meant that whenever I walked into a sanctuary, everyone knew me and I knew them. But the first week of college was not the case. I walked into a new synagogue. I had no idea who anybody was, and I didn't know a soul, nor did they know me from anyone else. After the service was over, I went and I introduced myself to the rabbi. And he said to me, "It's nice to have you with us. I remember your dad from rabbinical school, but that's not important. Tell me what is. Do you know how to read the Torah?" I said, "Of course I do. I studied it for my bar mitzvah." He said, "In a couple of weeks' time, it'll be Sukkot. Would you do us the honor of reading the Torah on the first day?" And I said, "With pleasure." Those few weeks went by, and I walked into the same sanctuary where I had formerly not known anyone, nor had anyone known me. And all of a sudden, after services that day, having read the Torah, I had a line of people wanting to know who I was, welcoming me to a new community, inviting me to Shabbat dinner. It was my entree into a new community, all because of the skills that I learned on November 12th, 1988, and exhibited for the first time that day to my home community. So I encourage all my bar mitzvah students, this is not a graduation date, just like it wasn't for me. No, they don't all have to grow up to be cantors someday, but someday they may find themselves in another community, in another country, and they'll find certain commonalities. The trope will be the same. The blessings will be the same. The same tasks will need to be carried out by different people in each synagogue wherever they find themselves. And because of what they studied for their bar mitzvah, they may too be able to find themselves at home in a new community. I hope that I can transmit my sense of enthusiasm and my desire to carry on these traditions to the next generations of Shar HaShamayim members, so that someday, 32 years later, they may say the same thing about how important the skills that they learned for their bar mitzvah were to the rest of their lives as a Jewish adult. Shabbat Toldot Shalom.